The void of deep space stretched infinitely in all directions, an ocean of darkness pierced only by the distant glow of dying stars. Captain Elias Voss gripped the arms of his chair as the Orion's wake hurtled through the abyss, its reinforced hull trembling from the sheer force of the sublight burn. They weren't supposed to be out this far. No one was. Captain, anomaly detected. Voss barely had time to exhale before Lieutenant Kira Rains, his navigator, called out again. Her voice, usually steady as steel, carried a thin edge of unease. Coordinates? He demanded. Rains tapped rapidly at her console. About 100,000 clicks ahead. Sir, it's massive. The Orion's wake was a reconnaissance vessel, designed to slip past enemy fleets and patrol contested borders. Its sensors could map entire star systems in seconds, yet the object in their path registered as something beyond any known scale. Give me visuals, Voss ordered. A split second later, the forward display lit up, and the breath caught in his throat. There, floating at the very edge of known space, was a ship. No, not a ship, a leviathan. A behemoth of impossible proportions. It's the size of a damn city, whispered Lieutenant Briggs, their weapons officer, his voice barely above a murmur. The vessel was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. It stretched for miles, its dark, metallic hull covered in scars, breaches, and eerie, glowing veins of energy that pulsed like a dying heartbeat. Its architecture was alien, sharp angles, impossible curves, structures that defied logic and physics. And yet, it wasn't lifeless. Deep within its core, something flickered. Something alive. Energy readings spiking, Rains reported. Sir, it's waking up. A low, ominous hum filled the cockpit, reverberating through the Orion's wake like a primal warning. Voss felt it in his bones, a sensation like static crawling under his skin. The vast, silent ship was no derelict. It had been waiting. Then all hell broke loose. A blinding white light erupted from the ship's hull, and before anyone could react, a gravitational wave slammed into them. The Orion's wake spiraled, alarms shrieking as the artificial gravity flickered. Voss was thrown forward, barely catching himself on the console as chaos erupted around him. Shields down to 30%. Briggs shouted, fighting to keep his balance. Engines offline, trying to reboot. Rain's fingers danced over her console, but the ship wasn't responding. Voss gritted his teeth. Get us the hell out of here. I can't. Something's pulling us in. The ship was being dragged inexorably toward the monstrous vessel. The external cameras showed the reality of their predicament. Massive, skeletal appendages extending from the alien craft, twisting like grasping fingers. It wasn't just gravity. It was intention. Brace for impact. The Orion's wake was yanked forward, a violent lurch that sent them crashing into their seats. The last thing Voss saw before darkness swallowed them was the gaping maw of the alien ship, opening to swallow them whole. Then everything went black. A sharp gasp tore from Captain Voss's throat as consciousness surged back like a tidal wave. He was weightless, floating in a dimly lit chamber with his arms tethered to the walls by an unseen force. His first instinct was to struggle, but his body felt sluggish, like something was pressing down on his very thoughts. Voss? Captain? It was Kira Rains. Her voice was weak, but filled with urgency. He turned his head and saw her suspended a few feet away, restrained in the same manner. Beyond her, Lieutenant Briggs and two more crew members, Santos and Halley, were trapped in the same invisible grasp. Report, Voss managed to rasp. His throat felt raw, his head pounding as if he had just been yanked through a gravity well. I don't know, Rains admitted, her eyes scanning their surroundings. After the crash, I blacked out. Next thing I knew, I woke up here. Voss turned his gaze beyond his crew and felt his breath catch. The chamber was immense, easily the size of an orbital docking station. Its walls weren't metal in the conventional sense but a shifting, undulating material that pulsed with an eerie bioluminescence. Strange, vein-like conduits slithered through the walls and ceiling, their glow intensifying with every movement the crew made. The air was thick, humming with a low frequency that wasn't just sound, it was something deeper, something that burrowed into the mind. And then, the walls moved. The entire structure breathed, expanding and contracting like a living organism. With each pulse, shadows flickered across the chamber, and from those shadows, things emerged. At first, they were amorphous, tall, shifting figures of dark mist. But as they neared, their forms solidified. They were towering beings, humanoid in shape yet utterly alien. Their bodies were encased in an obsidian-like exoskeleton, marked with glowing runes that pulsed in unison with the ship's rhythm. Their eyes, if they could be called that, were voids of swirling light, shifting between deep violet and blood-red. The largest of them stepped forward. Voss forced himself to meet its gaze, every instinct in his body screaming to look away. The air between them crackled, and then, without words, something pressed into his mind. It wasn't speech. It wasn't sound. It was intrusion. A storm of images flooded his thoughts. Vast battles in the void, worlds consumed in fire, celestial horrors awakening from ancient slumber. And at the center of it all, this ship. A last remnant of a war older than humanity itself. The alien's voice wasn't heard, but felt. You have trespassed. You will not leave. A surge of resistance flared in Voss's mind, and he fought to regain control. We didn't come here by choice. You pulled us in. The alien didn't respond in words, but Voss felt an overwhelming wave of indifference. Their survival was irrelevant. Their existence was a passing note in an endless song of war. And then, the creature raised a clawed hand. Pain exploded through Voss's skull as something began tearing into his mind. His memories, his thoughts, ripped open like a book being read by unseen hands. He screamed. He could hear the others crying out as well, their agony mingling with the oppressive hum of the ship. But then, something changed. A deep, guttural roar echoed through the chamber, shaking the walls. The alien interrogator froze, its grip on Voss's mind suddenly severed. The walls twitched, their glow dimming, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with tension. From the shadows, another figure emerged. This one was different. It was still alien, but its form was more streamlined, its armor sleeker, its movements more fluid. It carried itself like a predator, moving with deadly grace. The first group of beings turned toward it, their bodies shifting into defensive stances. And then, without warning, the new arrival attacked. It moved like a blur, a flash of dark metal and raw energy. Clawed hands slashed through the air, cutting through the exoskeletal beings like they were made of vapor. The chamber erupted into chaos. Voss felt his restraints disintegrate. He dropped to the ground, barely catching himself as the oppressive force holding him vanished. Around him, the rest of his crew collapsed, gasping for breath. "Move!" Voss shouted, shoving reins to her feet as one of the exoskeletal beings lunged toward them, only to be intercepted by the mysterious warrior. The thing let out an unearthly screech as it was torn apart, violet energy spilling from its wounds like liquid fire. The warrior turned toward them. For a brief moment Voss locked eyes with it. And in that instant, he understood, it wasn't just an alien. It was a prisoner just like them. It pointed toward a passage that had opened in the far wall, its meaning clear. Go. Voss didn't hesitate. He grabbed reins and hauled her forward, Briggs and the others following. They sprinted down the corridor, the sounds of battle fading behind them. The ship was alive, shifting as they moved, its walls opening new paths while closing others. It was guiding them somewhere, but to safety or another trap, Voss couldn't be sure. But there was no turning back. They had escaped captivity. Now they had to survive. The corridors twisted and reformed around them as they ran, as if the ship itself was an organism shifting its arteries to direct their path. Voss didn't know whether it was leading them to salvation or deeper into its belly, but stopping was not an option. The sounds of battle, inhuman screeches, the clash of metal against something far worse, echoed from behind them. Their mysterious savior was still fighting, buying them time. "Where the hell are we going?" Briggs panted, his breath ragged. "No idea," Voss admitted, barely dodging as the walls shifted again, revealing a gaping tunnel ahead. The strange, pulsating glow lining the passage flickered erratically, as if the ship itself was wounded. Then, suddenly, the floor beneath them tilted. The crew was thrown forward as gravity itself shifted. Voss slammed into the cold, metallic ground, barely managing to roll with the impact. Around him, the others groaned, struggling to rise. "What the hell was that?" Santos hissed, pushing herself up. Before anyone could answer, the walls convulsed. The living ship trembled as something massive moved within it, a seismic shift that sent a deep, resonating hum through the corridors. And then, the screaming started. It wasn't human. It wasn't even one voice. It was a chorus of shrieks, overlapping, distorted, coming from every direction. A surge of violet energy flickered through the veins in the walls, and the very air thickened, as if the ship itself was gasping in pain. Rains clutched her head. "Something's wrong." "The whole ship—" A deep, guttural boom cut her off, followed by a shockwave that sent them sprawling again. Then, the walls opened. Voss barely had time to react before figures emerged, twisted versions of the exoskeletal beings they had encountered before. These ones were different, more grotesque. Their bodies pulsed with raw, unstable energy, their limbs elongated, their forms fractured like they had been forcibly reshaped into something unnatural. And they were fast. "Contact!" Briggs bellowed, raising his rifle and firing. The plasma bolts struck one of the creatures dead on, but instead of falling, it absorbed the blast. The energy crackled through its form, then fired back at them like a redirected cannon. Briggs barely dodged as the shot vaporized the wall behind him. "Run!" Voss barked. They bolted down the corridor as the creatures lunged, their movements jagged and unpredictable. The tunnel twisted and breathed around them, shifting unpredictably. Voss knew it wasn't just the ship reacting, it was dying. A deep vibration shuddered through the ground, and suddenly, the tunnel collapsed behind them, crushing several of the creatures in a sickening crunch. The surviving ones shrieked in fury, but the collapse had bought them a moment. They kept running, barely pausing for breath, until they emerged into a vast chamber. And there, at its center, was something impossible. A ship. A human ship. Or at least, what was left of one. It was old, centuries old, judging by the erosion and scarring on its hull. Its design was unmistakably Terran, bearing the insignia of the United Earth Fleet, a faction that had disappeared long before any of them had even been born. "What the hell?" Rains breathed. Santos moved toward a shattered console near the wreckage. She wiped away centuries of dust, revealing a barely functional hollow interface. The display flickered to life, static-riddled and barely coherent. Voss leaned in, and his blood ran cold at the final transmission, still looping. "Warning: do not attempt to engage. Do not attempt to communicate. The ship is not abandoned. The ship is not derelict." Then, the message distorted into a single, chilling phrase. "It is awake." Before Voss could react, a violent pulse of energy surged through the chamber. The ship, the city-sized behemoth they were trapped inside, screamed. Not a sound, not a vibration, but a psychic wail that tore through their very minds. Voss staggered, gripping his skull as visions flooded his senses. A war. An ancient war. The thing they were inside, it wasn't just a ship. It was something more. Something alive. Something that had once been a weapon that had been imprisoned at the edge of space for a reason. And now it was waking up. The walls convulsed violently, and suddenly, the ship began to ascend. Briggs cursed. "Voss, we're moving!" Through a jagged opening in the chamber, Voss could see the blackness of space beyond, warping, twisting. The ship wasn't just moving. It was returning to war. And they were still inside it. The chamber shook violently as the massive alien ship, no, the entity, lurched forward, accelerating into the abyss of deep space. The gravitational force sent Voss and his crew sprawling across the floor, barely able to hold on as the impossible behemoth roared to life. The city-sized vessel wasn't just waking up, it was preparing for war. Voss pushed himself up, his head pounding. His crew was in chaos, Briggs struggling to reload his plasma rifle, Rains clutching a console for balance, Santos trying to make sense of the ancient human wreckage they had discovered. The walls around them pulsed erratically, no longer shifting with smooth precision but writhing, as if the ship was in pain. Through a jagged opening, Voss caught a glimpse of what lay beyond. The darkness of space was twisting. The stars stretched and blurred, spiraling into a maelstrom of shifting colors. The ship wasn't just moving. It was jumping. A sickening realization settled over him. It's going somewhere. Briggs turned, sweat dripping down his temple. Somewhere bad. Suddenly, a new sound filled the chamber, a guttural, mechanical howl that made the very air vibrate. The enemy had found them. The grotesque, twisted creatures from before had adapted. They poured into the chamber from the walls, their bodies shifting, their limbs crackling with unstable energy. But this time there were more. Dozens. Hundreds. And behind them, a figure emerged. It was different, taller, its exoskeleton marked with deep, pulsing scars of violet light. Unlike the others, its form didn't flicker or shift. It was stable. Evolved. It raised a jagged, bladed appendage, and the creature surged forward like a tidal wave. "Hold the line!" Voss roared, raising his rifle. Briggs fired first, his plasma bolts tearing through the first wave of creatures. But they were learning. The ones behind them twisted their bodies, absorbing the energy, reshaping it, redirecting it back toward the crew. The chamber erupted into a storm of fire and light. Santos was the first to go down, a redirected plasma bolt punching straight through her torso. She let out a strangled cry before collapsing, motionless. "Santos!" Rains screamed, but there was no time to mourn. Voss gritted his teeth and kept firing, but the creatures were too fast. They closed the distance in seconds, their claws slicing through the air. Then, a blur of movement. A figure dropped into the battle, moving with impossible speed. The warrior. Their alien savior from before had returned. But now, they weren't holding back. With a flick of their wrist, they unleashed hell. Their blade, now crackling with an energy Voss didn't recognize, cut through the enemy ranks like they were made of mist. Every slash sent a shockwave through the chamber, obliterating creatures in bursts of violet flame. The evolved enemy, the leader, turned its gaze toward the warrior. The two locked eyes. And then, the battle became something else. They collided. Not in a clash of metal, but in a storm of pure will. Their forms blurred as they moved at impossible speeds, striking, countering, adapting. Every impact sent waves of energy rippling through the chamber, distorting reality itself. Voss and his crew were nothing in the face of their war. Rains grabbed Voss's arm, eyes wide. "Captain, we have to go." He tore his gaze away from the titanic duel. She was right. If they stayed, they were dead. But how the hell were they supposed to escape? Then he saw it. The wreckage of the ancient human ship. Its engines were dead, its hull compromised, but its core, the jump drive, was still flickering with faint energy. A chance. Briggs, Rains. Get to that ship, now. They sprinted toward the wreckage, dodging stray energy blasts as the alien duel continued behind them. The old Terran ship was barely holding together, its interior charred and broken. Rains was already at a control panel, fingers flying. "I can power up the core, but there's no way to pilot it. It's hardwired to an old jump signature." Voss gritted his teeth. "I don't care where it takes us. Just do it." Briggs threw his last explosive charge at the approaching creatures, buying them precious seconds. Rains slammed the final command. The ship groaned as ancient systems sputtered back to life. The jump drive, decayed, flickering, let out a pulse of white-hot energy. Voss turned back toward the warrior. They were losing. The evolved enemy had the upper hand, striking faster, adapting quicker. In seconds, the warrior was on their knees, their weapon shattered, their armor cracked. The enemy raised its bladed arm for the final strike. Voss made a choice. He grabbed the plasma cannon from the wreckage, aimed at the enemy's exposed flank, and fired. The blast was weak, but it was enough. The shot disrupted the leader's form for half a second, and in that half-second the warrior moved. A final, desperate strike, straight through the enemy's core. The evolved leader let out a piercing wail as it was ripped apart, its energy destabilizing. And then, the ship screamed. Everything collapsed. The walls melted, the floor cracked, the reality around them shattered. "Jump now!" Voss roared. Rains slammed the final command. The last thing Voss saw was the warrior, staring back at him, unreadable, before the universe tore itself apart. Then, white-hot light. Silence. Voss awoke to the sound of alarms. His vision blurred. His body ached. They were alive. The ancient jump drive had worked. The wrecked ship had torn them away. But to where? He turned toward the viewport, heart hammering. Outside. A planet. No. A battlefield. Wreckage of alien and human ships alike littered the void, debris scattering like drifting corpses. A war. A war that had never ended. And in the distance, a shape. A city-sized ship. No. Another one. And this time, it had seen them. Voss exhaled. Hell. Here we go again.